Good morning to you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Is the mic on? Welcome back to the recommencement of our scientific program. I'm aware of the fact that we are running late by about 25 minutes. We'll try and cover up as we go on from here. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking to you about recent advances in regional anesthesia. As most of you would readily agree, regional anesthesia did not have a single eureka moment the way that general anesthesia had way back in 1846 in Boston. On the other hand, ma'am, will you please? On the other hand, regional anesthesia quietly grew over the years, and in terms of preference by patients, surgeons, and anesthetists alike, it often played second fiddle to general anesthesia. Of late, in the past few decades, there has been a resurgence in the popularity of regional anesthesia, and this popularity has led to newer discoveries with the future holding promise for more. If regional anesthesia is enjoying a renaissance at the current moment, this popularity owes itself to the introduction into clinical practice of objective guidance techniques such as peripheral nerve stimulation to begin with, and much later of ultrasound, that transform the esoteric art of regional anesthesia mastered by a select few to an exact, objective, and a readily reproducible science. And Dr. Chalaya spoke to you about the sequential electrical nerve stimulation this morning, so I will not be talking about it in any detail. In 1794, when Lazzaro Spallanzani discovered how blind bats navigated in the dark, little did he realize then that his technology would transform itself into an all-pervading technology which is benefiting medical science very much. In its modern form, ultrasound guidance for regional anesthesia has been around for more than 15 years and has been captivating the interest and attention of anesthetists the world over. But practitioners of ultrasound-guided regional anesthesia would readily agree with this statement that the ability to visualize a needle as it's being introduced along the path of the ultrasound beam is a huge challenge. Echogenic technology can improve needle visibility during ultrasound-guided regional anesthesia. As you can see here, the shaft of the needle has tiny serrations, and each of these notches act as corner cube reflectors which reflect the ultrasound beam back to the transducer, thereby enhancing the visibility of the needle. Sonosite has come up with this extended multi-beam window, and the manufacturers claim that when you select this window, as you see in the picture on the right, the machine automatically adjusts its imaging capabilities so as to make the needle more visible even at steeper angles of insertion. As microprocessor technology continues to improve, machines are becoming smaller and lighter, yet the focus is on maintaining high resolution of images. Brian Seitz and colleagues at the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center devised this mechanical arm which will hold the ultrasound probe in place. When commercially available, this mechanical arm will be especially useful for continuous blocks because both the hands of the operator will be free. Modern day ultrasound machines currently give you images in two dimensions. You have the short axis or the x-axis or transverse plane imaging, and you have the long axis or sagittal plane or y-axis imaging. If you need to switch from one dimension to the other, you will need to twist the transducer by 90 degrees. With this information, The operator then synthesizes a three-dimensional image in his or her mind and proceeds to perform a block. Since the nerve of interest and the needle needs to be aligned within that 1 millimeter thickness of the ultrasound beam, if the needle strays slightly, it can cause frustration, failures, and complications. In addition to the x-axis, which is the short axis, and the y-axis, which is the long axis, if you throw in a third plane as a coronal plane, which becomes the z-axis, then you have a third dimension. And if you have an ultrasound machine that can project an image of a volume of interest in 3 orthogonal planes, then that becomes a three-dimensional imaging. You can see here, this is a rendered or a reconstructed image of a lumbar vertebra. This is the midline path for a spinal or an epidural needle, and that is the epidural space. In the picture on the right, this is the ulnar artery and nerve in the forearm. This is in short axis, this is in long axis, and this is in the coronal plane. With the three-dimensional imaging, you could also reconstruct extended views. So this is the transverse processes of all the lumbar vertebrae. And in the picture below, you have the sciatic nerve in its entirety from the upper thigh to its branching in the lower or distal thigh. So you know that there are 3 dimensions. You have a short axis, a long axis, and the coronal plane, which is the z-axis. In addition to this, if you throw in another dimension, which in this case is time, you have 4-dimensional imaging. That is, if you see 3-dimensional imaging in real time, it becomes 4-dimensional imaging. This paper by Dr. Steve Clendenin and colleagues from Jacksonville, Florida, is the only paper of popliteal sciatic catheter being placed around the popliteal sciatic nerve, and in this cone of interest you can actually pick up the volume of anesthetic being distributed around the nerve. So what 3D and 4D imaging can ultimately do is they can improve the spatial awareness of the anatomical objects and therefore give you a better understanding of human anatomy. You could also have more precise needle position and injectate of local anesthetic. But as Dr. Su rightly pointed out, they are currently designed for low frequency transducers and the quality of image is not good, let alone the machines. Even the transducers at this point of time are fairly cumbersome to hold. And because the acquisition rate of the frames is not rapid enough, when you view the image in real time, there appear to be breaks between the images. The search for an ideal local anesthetic, that is a drug which has a long sensory block, minimal motor block, better nerve selectability, and a very low incidence of systemic toxicity is still on, yet there have been some exciting discoveries. So we'll talk of development in local anesthetic pharmacology with regard to older drugs that are coming back into vogue, some novel compounds, established drugs with local anesthetic properties, and Dr. Bosenberg spoke about adjuncts, so I'll not be referring to these. Of the Renaissance agents, 2-chloroprocaine, an ester local anesthetic, was used way back in the 1950s for intrathecal analgesia. But owing to concerns with neurotoxicity, it was withdrawn. Currently, the preservative-free form is available, and for day case surgeries across mainland Europe, this is becoming increasingly popular. Prilocaine was used since many years for peripheral nerve blocks with IVRA and topical anesthesia, and it is being looked at currently as an intrathecal agent. Of the novel compounds, chiral anesthetics, levobupivacaine, which is an S isomer of bupivacaine, and ropivacaine, which is an S isomer of propyl pipecolot have been around for many years. With respect to India, ropivacaine was launched a couple of years ago, and Abbott plans to launch chirocaine or levobupivacaine into the Indian market later this year. Butyl amino benzoate can be made available as an aqueous solution. And at physiological pH, the molecules of this drug are uncharged and hydrophobic. They partition into lipid layers and are not systemically absorbed. Therefore, when you do a single epidural injection or a peripheral nerve block, you can have a prolonged sensory block lasting almost 14 weeks. So when made commercially available, this drug will be very useful for intractable cancer pain relief in patients suffering with end-stage cancer. Tonicaine is again a novel drug. It is permanently charged, and it's a quaternary ammonium derivative of lidocaine. It can produce blocks lasting 9 times longer than lidocaine. And because this is a charged molecule, penetration across neuronal membranes is slow, and therefore the onset of action is slower. It's not yet available for use in human patients on a large scale. N-butyl tetracaine is an analog of tonicaine, and when used to provide analgesia following a sciatic nerve block in rats, it has been seen that it can cause a block lasting almost 2 weeks. Articaine again has been very popular with dental surgeons in Europe, owing to its rapid onset, short duration, and excellent periosteal penetration. It is being looked at as an intrathecal agent. This editorial by Butterworth applied in the last year's edition of the RAPM journal. And it is believed that over time, nerve-specific neurotoxins will replace local anesthetics, and local anesthetics themselves will become adjuncts. Neosaxetonin has been used for local infiltration following lap choles in patients. Pro-TX2 is being derived from the venom of the dreaded tarantula spider, and zoconotide, which is a synthetic analog of the above drug, is said to be 1,000 times more potent than intrathecal morphine, and it has been seen in animals that even after an infusion intrathecally for 1 week, it did not produce any tolerance. Pethidine and its analog samaridine and tricyclic antidepressants are also being looked at as potential intrathecal agents. Let us briefly look at emerging analgesics and analgesic technologies for acute pain management. Peripherally acting mu-opioid receptors, or PAMR antagonists, have the ability to impact analgesic delivery. Albumapan, which is available as an oral capsule, by selectively inhibiting gastrointestinal opioid receptors, can be very useful in patients having undergone bowel resections and on systemic analgesia with opioids by restricting the duration of postoperative ileus. Methyl naltrexone, which is currently available as a subcutaneous injection, within 30 minutes of administration, provides laxation and bowel movement in chronic cancer patients who've been on opioid therapy and suffering with constipation. So despite the fact that these are antagonists of opioid receptors, they have the ability to impact analgesic delivery by removing a few troublesome side effects. Liposomes are composed of biocompatible, biodegradable material and are non-immunogenic. They can be used as reservoirs for hydrophilic as well as lipophilic drugs, and they seek to prolong the duration of action of the delivered drug by releasing the drug slowly at a predictable rate. Extended release epidural morphine is available as Dipidur abroad, and with a single injection, you can have analgesia lasting 48 hours without the need for a redosing. Liposomal bupivacaine has just started being marketed as Exparel, and with a single dose, you can have an analgesia that lasts about 72 hours. The benefits of patient-controlled analgesia are very well known to all of us, and what succeeded with intravenous PCA has been extended with excellent results to epidural route also. Patient-controlled regional analgesia is becoming very, very popular, as Professor Raval told you, and you can have incisional PCRA, intra-articular PCRA, or perineural PCA. You can have a local anesthetic drug only or combine the local anesthetic with some adjuncts. And you can use either a programmable electronic pump or a disposable non-programmable elastomeric pump. These are the various disposable PCA pumps that are available, and the Vigon Freedom pump and the Baxter PCM pump are available in our country. Dr. Raval actually projected this slide. He is an exponent of LIA, or high volume local infiltration analgesia, as advocated by Kerr and Cohen. And it is actually taking over as the leading post-operative analgesia following total hip and total knee arthroplasties across mainland Europe and in the UK as well. And for the past about 1.5 years, it has been the standard protocol even in our institute following total hip and total knee arthroplasties, and our surgeons are extremely happy that they have regained control of post-operative analgesia and they're being able to dynamize their patients a bit earlier than with an epidural. But there are certain problems with indwelling catheters that we all know of. First, you need to put the catheter in, you need to secure the catheter, you could lose the catheter could migrate, could get occluded, you could have programming errors with your electronic pump, and there could be a relative lack of patient mobility because of tethering to a large apparatus. So catheter-free PCAs are in the stages of development. There is a concept of patient-controlled intranasal analgesia, wherein the aim is to squirt fentanyl into the nostril of a patient on demand, and it is expected that because there is not going to be a hepatic first pass effect, there will be excellent bioavailability and rapid absorption of the drug. Therefore, the patient can have good analgesia without a needle prick or a catheter in situ. The same applies to patient-controlled transpulmonary analgesia, wherein the attempt would be to deliver aerosolized liposome encapsulated fentanyl to the patients. Both of these are in stages of development and are not yet commercially available. Oral or sublingual PCA aims to use this handheld device, which composes of this cartridge, which has 40 nanotabs of sufentanil. And on demand, when 1 nanotab of sufentanil is placed under the tongue of a patient, there is excellent transmucal delivery, and you also have high bioavailability because there is no hepatic first pass effect. And this particular modality is at the moment undergoing a phase 3 trial. As you all know, the skin is the largest organ of the human body, and its large surface area and easy accessibility makes it an attractive option for delivery of pain-relieving drugs. Transdermal fentanyl, transdermal clonidine, and transdermal buprenorphine have all been used to provide analgesia when the patient requires it. Transdermal diclofenac and transdermal lidocaine, both of which are available in India, are not absorbed systemically but provide analgesia at the site of application of the patch. The stratum corneum of the skin, however, is an effective barrier that prevents delivery of the drugs across this particular layer into the patient's body. So, iontophoresis, to put it shortly, is the use of an electrical current to deliver drug across this stratum corneal barrier. And this iontophoretic fentanyl transdermal system, once made commercially available, can be put on the patient's upper arm or the upper chest, and by activating the demand button, 40 micrograms of fentanyl will be delivered to the patient with a 10-minute lockout interval. And this device will be good for 80 doses. And Lidocyte topical system is also commercially available, and it is FDA approval at this moment for superficial dermatological procedures and for venipuncture only. And finally, I'll be concluding before time. To conclude, Maybe in days to come, hopefully years to come, or even decades to come, the practice of administering peripheral nerve blocks may simply be taken out of our hands. Thank you very much for your attention.